Hello, this is part 2 of the Hypothesis Test 2 lecture in the QED module NDev. And we're explaining here that we have an example where we are sampling from a population of all students to find out which students on the whole support aid more, the dev students or the non-dev students. And the two possible situations in the whole population are that the whole population of dev students perhaps does not support aid more highly than the population of non-dev students. Or you could have the situation where the proportion of pro-aid students is higher among all the population of dev students compared to all the population of non-dev students. So either it's not higher or it is higher. The problem is that we can't directly observe either possibility because we haven't got the time and the resources to speak to everybody in the population. And even though I've drawn just a certain number, 10 or 20 people here, this is meant to represent everybody, so it could be hundreds or thousands of dev students and non-dev students if you go back years to all the people that have ever done dev and so on. So we haven't got the time to observe the whole population, so what can we do? Well, we can only take a sample, and the next slide has got some possibilities for what we're going to get in our samples. We're going to observe one of these, and the samples I put in square boxes, and here they're meant to be 84 altogether, aren't there? So it might be 48 here and 42 here and 42 here, but we don't know exactly how many. So you could see a sample like this, so that's more pro-aid than the non-dev, or you could see a sample like this, a sample like this, and a sample like this. So in each case, that's one possible pair of samples. So you could see that, or you might see that, or that, or that. Now let's look at them one by one, and it is worth going through these possibilities very carefully and comparing them with the populations, making sure you understand what's going on. So these just represent the possible pair of samples we could take. So first of all, what could happen is this. We could get this sample here. So sample of dev students, sample of non-dev students, in which the percentage of pro-aid responses is lower in the dev students compared to the non-dev students. Okay, so that's that combination. Or we might observe that, where in the sample we take, our subsample of dev students and the subsample of non-dev students have got exactly the same proportion of people being pro-aid. That's the same. Or we could take, this might come out, a situation like this, where, okay, it's higher in the dev students, but just slightly higher than in the non-dev students. It's another possibility. Or the last possibility is we could get this. So in this sample, the dev student subsample, definitely considerably more people saying yes to aid in this than there are in the non-dev sample. And this is what I'm calling significantly more. Now the problem is that any of these possible samples, like this pair of samples here, this one here could have come from either this overall population or from this overall population by random selection. Or I could have got this pair of samples here. This might have come either from this population or this population by random sampling. So you need to think carefully about this slide and make sure you can understand how any of these pairs, right, you could have chosen this pair of samples randomly if the real situation in the population is like this, or if it's like this. So just make sure you understand that any of these pairs of samples could have come from either parent population, because that's an important thing to understand. And please ask in the lecture or put a notice on the forum asking about this if you don't understand it. To summarize this, what we're going to do is we're grouping these three together, because these three are the ones where it's not really much higher in dev. Either it's lower in dev, the same, or only a little bit higher in dev, versus this situation here where it is considerably higher, or as I'm saying, significantly higher in dev. So when you try and explain this, if this is the population situation, number of pro-aid students is not higher in dev, then you might like to match it up with that. So in the sample, it's not higher in dev. And in the whole population, if it is higher in dev, you might want to match that up with the sample where it's much higher in dev. Unfortunately, as we've seen, both combinations are possible. You could get this in the whole population and either of these two things in your sample, or it could be higher in the population and either you get this or you get this in the sample. So when you just see one of these, either you see this or this, how can you tell from what you see whether it came from here or from here? So how's the sample going to tell us which of the two possible true situations in the parent populations is true, is actually applies? So how can we tell from the sample what's going on in the population? And that's the problem of inference.